this film, we will be showing all our different interpretations of Act 4, Scene 3. This is when Malcolm tests Macbeth to see if he really is for helping out Scotland, and not on the side of Macbeth, the tyrant.
This tyrant whose sole name blisters our tongues was once thought honest. You have loved him well, he hath not touched you yet. I am young, with something you may deserve of him through me, and the wisdom to offer a weak, poor, innocent lamb to appease an angry god.
I am not treacherous.
But Macbeth is. A good and virtuous nature may recoil in an imperial charge.
So what do we think about this passage?
So one way of interpreting Malcolm's tone is being very accusational and angry with Macduff. When he says, this tyrant whose sole name blisters our tongues, he's cursing Macbeth's name, and when he's saying that he was once thought honest, you have loved him well, he is basically saying, why should I trust you, Macduff? What leads me to believe you or side with you? And back then the nobles were known to be loyal to the king, so Malcolm is very unsure and skeptical whether he can trust Macduff.
I agree. And also, later in that passage, Malcolm's anger is also partially caused by the very idea of Macduff being treacherous towards him. Malcolm gives every reason why Macduff could be part of the king's aid. He thought if anyone siding with Macbeth is enough to send him into a rage.
As well, once Macduff realizes that Malcolm is accusing him of treason, it's almost like Macduff is pleading with him to realize his own innocence. However, Macduff still realizes that he's inferior to Malcolm because of the nobility of the time, so he knows pleading is the only thing he can really do.
Although Malcolm is portrayed as angry in that last passage, we feel that he is more calm and rational than that. Malcolm soon-to-be king is going to approach the situation more intelligently than simply being full of rage. So in this next interpretation, Malcolm calmly but intellectually accuses Macduff. This tyrant whose sole name blisters our tongue was once thought honest. You have loved him well, he hath not touched you. I am young, but something you may deserve of him through me, in wisdom to offer up a weak, poor, innocent lamb to appease an angry god.
I am not treacherous.
But Macbeth is. A good and virtuous nature may recoil at an imperial charge. As you can see, the tone of their voices drastically changed through the whole passage. With this new tone, the passage gives way to some more deeper meaning.
Instead of showing anger and hostility to Macduff, he's really trying to get information out of him to learn whether or not he is trustworthy. In both interpretations, the question of, why should I trust you, is formed. However, in the first one, Malcolm sounds very accusational and already assumes that Macduff is on Macbeth's side. In the second interpretation, his calmer version of questioning Macduff is really a way of showing his concern, and whether Macduff really is all for helping out Scotland.
Yeah, I agree. And also, Malcolm previously was just spewing out rage-filled accusations, but it becomes more clear in this interpretation. Being an intelligent man, Malcolm speaks of the treacherous motives of Macduff to appease an angry god, rather than to provoke a reaction out of Macduff in this passage.
When Macduff says, I am not treacherous, he clearly shows his passion for his country and how he feels insulted by Malcolm, as opposed to the last interpretation when Macduff is simply asking to not be looked upon as dangerous. With this better interpretation, he demands it instead.
Malcolm goes on to inform Macduff of his justified mistrust towards him. In this next passage, Macduff tries to clear his name, and Malcolm is portrayed as being sad and mournful in this first interpretation.
Bleed, bleed, poor country, great tyranny, lay thou my faces sure, for goodness dare not check thee, where thou thy wrongs, the title is afeard. Fare thee well, Lord, I would not be the villain that thou thinkest, for the whole space thou in the tyrant's grasp, from the rich east to boot.
Be not offended, I speak not in absolute fear of you. I think our country sinks beneath the yoke, it weeps, it bleeds, and each new day a new gash is added to her wounds. I think withal there be hands uplifted in my right, and here from gracious England I have offered of goodly thousands. But for all this, when I should tread upon the tyrant's head, or weep it to my sword, yet my poor country shall have more vices than it had been before, more suffer and more sundry ways than ever, by him that shall succeed.
What should he be? In this first interpretation, Malcolm is beginning his testing of Macduff and begins explaining his knowledge of Scotland's corruptness in a weepy tone. During this time, war is about to break out and innocent people are being murdered for no reason at all. This very thought softens the heart of the should-be king, and in response he is saddened when speaking of it.
Malcolm's tone in this passage reveals that he is so saddened by the corruption of Scotland that he can only mourn as he thinks of the decay of this once great kingdom. Malcolm's tone suggests as though there is nothing to do but to sit and watch as his country, as it weeps, it bleeds, and each new day a new gash is added to her wounds.
So he is shown to be pessimistic and down about the condition of Scotland, and he's portraying the pain and suffering within his country. But I think he acts that on purpose to see if Macduff really has the motivation to help Scotland get back to normal. He wants to see if Macduff will rise and try to encourage Malcolm to fix things in their country. His sad tone is a way to test Macduff's reaction and how he responds in terrible times. Is he a true leader who will be there to stand tall in the worst of times?
In this next interpretation, instead of being brought down by the unfortunate events of Scotland, Malcolm's tone acts more as if he is ready to rise up and do something about Scotland's issues. Bleed, bleed, poor country, great tyranny, lay thou thy bases sure, for goodness dare not check thee, were thou thy wrongs. The title is afeard. Fare thee well, Lord, I would not be the villain that thou thinkest, for the whole space that's in the tyranny's grap, and from the rich east to boot.
Be not offended, I speak not in absolute fear of you. I think our country sinks beneath the yoke, it weeps, it bleeds, and each new day a gash is added to her wounds. I think withal there should be hands uplifted in my right, and here from gracious England have I offer of goodly thousands. But for all this, when I shall tread upon the tyrant's head, or wear it in my sword, yet my poor country shall have more vices than it had before, more suffer and more sundry ways than ever by him that shall succeed.
What should he be? Once Scotland's well-being is brought up and Macduff believes Malcolm can't help him, Malcolm's passion and almost anger comes out. Deep down, Malcolm knows he should be king because he truly believes he could be of immense aid to his country, instead of simply being brought down about it like the last interpretation. However, he rapidly remembers his purpose of testing Macduff and goes on to say that he is not fit to be king.
Yeah, and Malcolm's rage is more fitting than being mournful. His immense passion leads him being past sad and rather straight into anger. This anger is brought up because he knows that Scotland has the potential to revive as the great nation as it used to be under Duncan.
He desperately wants things back in order. When he says it weeps, it bleeds, and each new day a gash is added to her wounds, he's really appalled by everything that has happened. By acting passionate, he wants to see if Macduff has the same will and courage as him to go out and end the treason that has plagued Scotland. In this next passage, Macduff learns of all of Malcolm's flaws. At first throughout the play he was defending him, and thinking that there was no way he could be any worse than Macbeth. However, he comes to understand that Malcolm is unfit for the throne and Scotland is doomed forever.
Oh, Scotland, Scotland!
If such one be fit to govern, speak. I am advised spoken.
Fit to govern? No, not to live. O nation miserable, with an untitled tyrant bloody sceptred, then shalt thou see thy wholesome days again. Since that the truest issue of thy throne by his own interdiction stands accursed, and does blasphemy his breed, thy royal father was the most sainted king, the queen that bore thee, oftener upon her knees than on her feet, died every day she lived. Fare thee well, these evils thou repeatest upon themselves, have banished me from Scotland. O my breast, thy hope ends here.
Malcolm's sarcastic tone emphasizes the purpose of the test. This makes it seem like it's an obvious decision that he shouldn't be king, when in reality he knows that he's the best person for the job. The sarcastic tone brings out an almost insulting tone in his voice, saying, "Are you that blind to think that I'm what's best for Scotland?"
The reason for Macduff's anger is he could be displaying how fed up he is with all the horrible things that are happening in his life. With Macbeth's treason and Scotland's terrible condition, he's just very frustrated. And to learn about how unfit Malcolm is, it really sets him off and triggers the violent emotions within him. He's so sick and tired of the corruption, and he just responds in the only way he knows how, which is in absolute disgust. However, we feel Macduff responds in a more sorrowful, hopeless tone in this passage. By learning of Malcolm's flaws and how unfit he really is, he begins to feel like visiting Malcolm and trying to persuade him to take over Scotland was just a waste of time.
Oh, Scotland, Scotland!
If such a one be fit to govern, speak. I am have spoken.
Fit to govern? No, not to live. O nation miserable, with an untitled tyrant bloody sceptred, when shalt thou see thy wholesome days again? Since that the truest issue of thy throne by his own interdiction stands accursed, and does blasphemy his breed, thy royal father was a saint, the queen that bore thee, oftener upon her knees than on her feet, died every day she lived. Fairly well, these evils thou repeats upon thyself have banished me from Scotland. O my breast, thy hope ends here.
Macbeth's tone in this passage shows his intense feelings for the well-being of Scotland. He takes it very seriously and is enraged at the thought that Macduff will even consider having Malcolm be king with all his false flaws that he has given about himself.
Macduff's hopeless tone shows that he feels there is nothing more to look forward to. In his mind, Malcolm was the last and most trustworthy person who could really help. But after hearing how unfit he is to rule, he can only help but think, where will Scotland go from here? He is such a passionate man and wants the very best for his country, so after hearing of Malcolm's ways, his hope is lost. He is appalled and brought down at how someone who seems so good could be so bad. Overall, there are many different ways you can view this scene of Malcolm testing Macduff. Each interpretation can bring light and new meaning to each passage, and it can help show the development of both characters.
Back to you, Miss Cooper.